This is an Inbound Logistics AI presentation. Welcome to the Inbound Logistics educational series presented by IL AI Audio. In this episode, our virtual hosts Jane and John tackle the question, what is inbound logistics?
Ever hit that track order button like a dozen times before your package even ships?
I think we've all been there.
It's like we're all hooked on that little dopamine hit of a delivery update. But seriously, have you ever stopped to think about what it actually takes to get all that stuff to your doorstep?
It's honestly kind of mind-blowing when you start to peel back the layers on that.
Right. It's a whole hidden world of logistics and planning. And that's exactly what we're diving into today, the fascinating, often unseen realm of inbound logistics.
And to help us break it all down, we're tapping into some seriously insightful info from inboundlogistics.com.
They've got some great resources on their site that really unpack how this whole thing works, the impact it has on businesses, and let's be real, how it affects us as consumers every single day.
Because even if we don't realize it, inbound logistics touches pretty much every single industry out there.
It's like the behind-the-scenes crew working overtime to keep the world running.
That's a perfect way to put it. It's the journey of those raw materials, those components, traveling all the way from their origin point to wherever they need to be next, whether that's a manufacturing plant, a distribution center, you name it.
Okay, so think of it like this. Let's say we're a company making those noise-canceling headphones that everyone and their grandma seems to have these days. What's step one in this whole inbound logistics process? Where do we even begin?
Well, you can't just dive in head first. It all starts with, well, a plan. This planning stage is mission critical. It's like a blueprint for a building. Companies figure out everything. The materials they're going to need, how much of each thing, where they'll source everything from, and of course the best way to get all those pieces to where they need to be.
So it's not as simple as just picking up the phone and ordering a truckload of, ear cushions.
Not quite. It's way more strategic than that. The sourcing stage, that's where companies get picky. They're on the hunt for the absolute best suppliers. They're hammering out contracts and considering all those nitty-gritty details like lead times and minimum order quantities.
Lead times. MOQs.
Okay.
Break those down for us, sure.
So lead time, that's basically the time it takes a supplier to get that order out the door and delivered. And MOQ, that stands for minimum order quantity. It's the smallest amount you can order from a supplier at one time.
Ah, so you can't just order, 2 headphone jacks.
Probably not. These little details, they have a massive impact on a company's bottom line, their storage needs. It all ties together.
Makes sense. I can see how miscalculating that could really throw things out of whack. You don't want to be drowning in ear cups when you're still waiting on the circuit boards back.
Exactly. And once you've got those supplier relationships locked in, then it's on to the purchasing phase, making it all official.
Contract time. This is where the lawyers get involved.
Well, maybe. But really, it's about getting everything down in black and white, those agreements, the prices, and nailing down those delivery schedules so everyone's on the same page.
So we've got our blueprint, our materials are spoken for, contracts are signed. It's go time, right? Time to load up those headphones and get them moving.
You got it. Transportation, that's where the rubber meets the road, literally. This is where companies get to choose the most efficient way to move those headphones from point A to point B.
And this could involve, trucks, trains, those massive cargo ships?
Oh yeah, you name it. Planes, too. The decision really hinges on a bunch of factors. How far those headphones need to travel, how quickly they need to get there, and of course the almighty dollar, how much it's going to cost. Oh, and we can't forget about the rise of e-commerce. We're seeing some pretty wild stuff with drones being used for those final mile deliveries.
Drones airdropping headphones directly to my doorstep. Sign me up. That's next level. Okay, but let's pump the brakes on the drone deliveries for a sec, because I'm curious about that moment when those shipments finally arrive. What happens then?
All right, so that brings us to what's called the receiving stage. It's quality control time. Imagine getting a huge shipment of those headphone parts only to find out that, oops, they're damaged or they just don't meet your standards.
Talk about a major buzzkill.
Total buzzkill. This stage is all about making sure everything's in tip-top shape before it moves down the line.
So it's like a checkpoint to catch any hiccups early on.
Exactly. All right, so let's say those headphones have passed inspection with flying colors. Now what? Where do they go? Well, you're not going to leave them sitting on the loading dock. This is where storage comes in. Those massive warehouses you've probably seen pictures of, that's where all the magic happens.
Rows and rows of those towering shelves stacked with who knows what.
It's pretty impressive, right? But it's way more than just having enough space. You got to optimize every square inch. Think about it. Making sure you're rotating inventory so nothing gets forgotten in the back corner, maintaining the right temperature and humidity levels so those electronics stay happy. It's a science.
So it's like creating the perfect environment to keep those headphones in pristine condition. But I've got to ask, with so many different parts coming in from all over the place, how do companies keep it all straight? It seems like a recipe for a massive logistical headache.
And that brings us to the grand finale of the inbound logistics journey: inventory management. This stage is all about finding that sweet spot, having enough inventory to meet demand, but not so much that you're drowning in excess inventory and costs.
It's like walking a tightrope. Lean too far one way and you risk running out of stock, too far the other way, and you're sitting on a mountain of unsold products.
You've got it. And that's where things get really interesting because companies are relying more and more on data, using fancy algorithms to predict demand and optimize their ordering. It's pretty wild.
So they're using data to kind of predict the future of headphone demand.
In a nutshell, yeah. And it's not just about preventing those nightmare stockout situations. Good inventory management can save companies a ton of money, less waste, lower storage costs, the list goes on.
Because at the end of the day, time is money, especially in the fast-paced world of pretty much everything these days.
You said it. And that actually brings us to another important piece of this puzzle: the challenges that come with managing this whole inbound logistics process effectively. Because believe me, it's not always smooth sailing.
Okay, so we've laid out all the steps, all the moving pieces, but I think we all know from experience that even the best laid plans, especially when it comes to shipping and logistics, they don't always go off without a hitch, right? What are some of those curveballs, those moments where it feels like the supply chain's gone a little haywire?
Yeah, you're telling me. It's like trying to orchestrate this massive symphony where even one instrument being out of tune can throw off the whole thing. And one of the biggest challenges companies face is, well, shipping inefficiency. Those supply chain disruptions we keep hearing about on the news, they can really throw a wrench in the whole system.
It's the worst, right? It's
Yeah.
like that feeling when your package is stuck in some random warehouse with no estimated delivery date in sight.
And for businesses, those delays, they're not just annoying. They can have huge ripple effects, missed deadlines, production screeching to a halt, not to mention what it does to your reputation if you can't deliver on your promises.
Reputation is everything. So what causes those shipping issues in the first place?
Oh, it could be a million things. We're talking freak weather events, ports getting jammed up, like massive traffic jams. But for ships, sometimes there aren't even enough truck drivers to haul everything where it needs to go.
It's like the butterfly effect, right? One tiny thing throws off the whole system.
Exactly. And that brings us to another big challenge in the world of inbound logistics, that dreaded information vacuum. Because in today's world, we're used to knowing everything instantly, but that doesn't always apply to supply chains.
It's true. Like, I can track my takeout order in real time, but knowing where my package actually is, that feels like a mystery sometimes.
And that lack of transparency, it can be a major headache for companies. It's like trying to navigate through a maze blindfolded. If you don't know where your shipments are, how can you possibly stay ahead of delays or make sure those production lines keep humming?
And if you don't have the materials on hand when you need them, well, that throws a wrench in everything, right?
Exactly. And that segues perfectly into another big challenge: balancing supply and demand. This is where things get tricky. Having too much inventory sitting around, that's a recipe for wasted money and storage headaches. But having too little, well, then you risk those dreaded stockouts. Empty shelves, frustrated customers, you get the picture.
Talk about a high-stakes balancing act. So how do companies even begin to wrap their heads around that? Do they just cross their fingers and hope for the best?
Well, if only it were that easy. A lot of companies are getting seriously smart about this, relying on sophisticated data analytics and forecasting models to get a better handle on those ebbs and flows of demand.
So instead of just guessing, they're using data to get a sneak peek into the future of what people are going to want to buy.
That's the gist of it. They're looking at past trends, current market data, even factoring in things like weather patterns to anticipate what they'll need when they'll need it.
Sounds pretty high-tech. I'm all for using data to make smarter decisions, but let's say a company has their forecasting down pat, they've got those algorithms humming along. Are there still other things that can trip them up?
Oh, for sure. Even with the best predictions in the world, you can't always predict a sudden surge in demand. And that's where capacity constraints come in. Picture this. A company's product goes viral, suddenly everyone wants it. But their warehouse, well, it's bursting at the seams. Not enough space to handle that tidal wave of inventory.
It's like that feeling when you try to stuff one more suitcase into an already overflowing car trunk. Something's got to give.
And that something is often a bottleneck in the supply chain. Companies might find themselves scrambling for solutions, whether it's securing more warehouse space, ramping up transportation, or even looking into automation to help them scale up without sacrificing efficiency.
So even when you've got demand figured out, there's still the whole challenge of actually being able to fulfill those orders.
Exactly. And then, of course, there's that constant pressure to make sure everything that's coming in meets those quality standards.
Right, because what good is having a warehouse full of headphones if they don't actually work?
Exactly. Quality issues, they can pop up at any point in the process. You might get a shipment of raw materials that's subpar or components that were damaged in transit, you name it. And it doesn't take much for those little issues to cascade into big, expensive problems.
Okay, so let's talk worst case scenarios for a sec. What happens when those quality issues slip through the cracks? Is it all downhill from there? All right, so we've talked about the challenges, those moments where things get a little messy in the world of inbound logistics. But it can't be all doom and gloom, right? There's got to be a light at the end of the tunnel. What are some of the ways companies are tackling these challenges head on?
Oh, absolutely. It's like a constant game of chess, always adapting, always finding new strategies. And one of the biggest game changers has been technology.
Okay, so you're saying the robots are coming to save the day.
Well, maybe not robots exactly, but technology is definitely lending a helping hand. Remember that information vacuum we talked about earlier? That lack of visibility into where shipments are in real time? That's where tech is really stepping up.
So instead of hitting refresh on that tracking link 100 times a day, companies have a better way.
Way better. We're talking sophisticated tracking systems, data analytics, cloud-based platforms all working together to give companies that much-needed transparency into their entire supply chain.
So they can see those shipments moving across the map in real time.
You got it. And it goes way beyond just knowing where things are. These systems can factor in everything from weather conditions to traffic patterns, even potential slowdowns at ports or border crossings. It's like having a crystal ball for your shipments.
That's next level stuff. But even with all that data, all those insights, it still takes a human touch to make the right decisions, right?
100%. Technology is a powerful tool, but it can't replace good old-fashioned human judgment, especially when it comes to things like building strong relationships with suppliers.
Because at the end of the day, business is all about relationships, right?
Absolutely. You can have the fanciest software in the world, but if you don't have solid partnerships with your suppliers, things can still go south pretty quickly.
It's like that saying, teamwork makes the dream work.
Exactly. And speaking of teamwork, let's loop back to that challenge of capacity constraints for a sec. Because even if you've got the demand figured out, the tech in place, you still need the physical space to handle all those incoming shipments.
Right. You can't exactly magic a bigger warehouse into existence.
Yeah.
So how are companies tackling that challenge?
It's all about planning ahead, thinking strategically about how to scale up operations in a way that makes sense. Some companies are getting really creative with their warehouse designs, using modular structures that can be easily expanded or shrunk down depending on their needs. Others are turning to automation, those robots we were talking about earlier, to make the most of their existing space.
Robots to the rescue. I'm picturing those futuristic warehouses where everything's moving like a perfectly choreographed dance.
You're not far off. Automation is becoming more and more common in warehouses and distribution centers, and for good reason. It can really boost efficiency and productivity, which is key when you're dealing with high volumes of inventory.
Makes sense. But even with robots handling some of the heavy lifting, I imagine quality control is still a top priority.
Absolutely. And it's not just about checking for defects at the very end of the line. Companies are integrating quality checks throughout the entire process, from the moment those raw materials leave the supplier's facility to the moment they reach their final destination.
So it's about catching those potential issues early on before they have a chance to snowball into bigger problems.
Exactly. And again, technology is playing a key role here. We're seeing everything from sensors that can detect damage or spoilage in real time to AI-powered systems that can analyze data to pinpoint patterns that might indicate a quality issue.
It's amazing how much technology has changed the game when it comes to inbound logistics. But at the end of the day, it's all about delivering a great experience to the customer.
Couldn't agree more. All those efforts, the technology, the partnerships, that laser focus on quality, it all boils down to making sure customers get what they ordered when they expect it and in perfect condition.
It makes you appreciate those. Your order is out for delivery notifications even more, right?
Right. There's a whole lot happening behind the scenes to make that happen.
A whole hidden world of logistics. And on that note, I think I might just have to treat myself to a little online shopping spree, to show my appreciation for the magic of inbound logistics.
Sounds like a plan.
Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into the fascinating world of inbound logistics. We hope you enjoyed the journey.
Join the conversation on this topic by clicking the link in the show notes or visiting inboundlogistics.com.